Alrighty guys, we're sitting down with Peter Doyle today, the CEO of MA. How are you, mate?
Good. Yourself?
Yeah, very good. Fantastic. Elaborate. How you been?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy time of the year, but everything's starting to ramp up.
Yep.
World Superbike last weekend, and Speedway season is almost over, and we're getting into motocross and enduro and all the other disciplines. So.
Awesome, mate. Awesome. So my audience is just a typical average moto enthusiast. They probably hear CEO of MA and think suit and tie, guy that makes all the rules. But upon doing some research upon you, it's actually quite the opposite. So you're a motorcycle enthusiast. I've got a few notes here. I've done a little bit of research, but you're pretty well no different to the rest of us. You're born into the sport, motorcycle mechanic in the Grand Prix at the age of 16. You participated in various disciplines yourself. You spent 25 years with Kawasaki. You even helped develop their bike on the World Superbike team, which went on to win a World Superbike Championship. As well as that, you spent time in race management in Australia. You work with American Suzuki, Yoshimura in the USA, and you're now here as the CEO of MA. Has there ever been a time throughout your history you haven't been involved in bikes?
No, always. Bought into it, so as you mentioned, so I'm not sure when I was going to race meetings, probably in the pusher.
Yeah.
I think my father finished second in an Australian championship in the 50s, early 60s. So so he was he actively competed in road and motocross. Back in those days on the same bike. So born into it and always been involved in it.
Yeah, cool. And then what about your own your own history within the sport, as in terms of racing? You ever did any yourself, or it was always on the technical?
No, I did. Obviously, like many, we all find a dirt bike when we're 3, 4, 5 years old, and I rode dirt bikes, mainly Bairnsdale, Gippsland Centre, Maffra Newry, down those ways is where we grew up, and then moved to Melbourne, obviously as a early teenager, and commenced school and worked down here. But did a bit of road racing. I was always looking on that technical side though. That's where my father was involved. He was an engineer, so always interested me in the technical side, always pulling things apart, and ended up getting an apprenticeship at Kawasaki when I was 15. 15, and that went on to World Championships. Talk about those times. Oh, great! So obviously went mechanic on GP at 16 with Greg Hansford, who was one of our elite racers back in the day, and doing Grand Prix there, and that led I think 4 years in Europe, and then back here in Australia, and worked in motocross with Anthony Gunter and Trevor Williams, and then back into road racing, because companies used to switch. We're now going to focus on road racing. We're now going to focus on motocross, depending where their sales lay and what models they had at the time.
Yep.
And back to road racing with Robbie Phillips and the Wheeling family, and ended up back in Europe running the World Superbike team with Kawasaki, and we actually brought them back into racing after they'd been out for quite a period, and then we won the World Championship in 1993 with Scott Russell, American rider.
Yeah.
It's always been involved, but I guess the key was, you're riding bikes all your life and you like to ride it, but in the end, it was my father sort of made the decision for me after I broke both my wrists at Broadford on a motocross bike.
Right.
And I had to do a road race a couple of weeks later in Adelaide, and production long distance race.
Yep.
And I was the guy in the rattle gun for the rear wheel, which doesn't go down well with broken wrists. But I didn't want to show that my riding bikes was interfering with my work, so I did it anyway, and bones shaking around. But you had to make a decision of, well, you either want to ride them or you got to work on them.
Yeah.
And I think I was better at working on them, so that's where I went.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So you've got a long and varied history there in the sport, which I'll say myself, when I hear CEO of MA, I think probably someone plucked out of the business estate in the city and put into the role. But you've got a long history in bikes. Has that passion ever left you, or it's always?
No, it's always there. I think for most of us in the sport, that I feel very lucky and fortunate that I've been able to get into a sport, the sport that you like, and and stayed there. And I've been in it for over nearly 50 years.
About as long as anyone.
And as long as anyone, and it's just a bit of a change coming here. I was always on the side, tongue in cheek, but I was on the side where you sort of got paid to break the rules, and now you move to the administration of the sport where you sort of got to make the rules. It's a bit different. Yeah.
Oh, it's cool to hear someone like you is in charge. So that's awesome. So we'll move on to your time at MA. You become a part-time technical officer. 2014. It was a pretty quick ascent from there. Sport director on the 8th of March 2016. CEO by the 11th of April 2016. What was that like?
Well, it was an interesting period. So I was in the US and I came back and I started doing part-time work for MA on the technical side because they didn't have any technical people involved in the sport. I'm of the opinion, by the way, that our sport's, I'm biased because I'm from the technical side, but I think we are a technical sport. So I came in, I was doing a lot of technical work. It was supposed to be only 3 days a week, turned to 4 days a week, 5 days, 6 days. And then at MA was, unbeknown to me because I wasn't involved on the political side, MA was, and the state bodies were basically at war with each other, and MA was broke and probably insolvent and had massive issues. And before we knew it, most of the people that were involved, boards and managers, were gone.
Right.
And it was like, I was on a plane going to Europe and I got off the plane in Bangkok and I got a call from the president at the time who said, can you come back to Australia? We've just sacked a few people and nobody knows how to pay the wages of the staff.
Yeah, right.
So I stayed, got a hotel for the night and got a plane back the next day, and then essentially they put me in as the interim CEO, and we started to uncover a lot of the issues that the place had, especially in regard to financial areas. And look, we've had, no disrespect to the financial people, but in the end, engineering, finance, it's all numbers. We'll pretty quickly be able to get to the bottom of what all the issues were, and then set about trying to rectify it, and we managed to get it back on track in about 18 months, and it was profitable and debt free, and of course around that time COVID started to, just as we started to get going, COVID crept in and set everybody back again.
So what led to it being in such a bad place there before you come on?
I think it was poor management. I think the infighting and its structure of the federated sporting model. Too many directors, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. But as I said, in the end, you've got to put it down to poor management, and some of the people that they hired were highly credentialed and incompetent.
Explain that. As in, just not passionate about the sport,
people have they were none of these people weren't part of the sport.
Gotcha.
They were external people with university degrees and just not very good at their job.
Gotcha. We'll leave it at that. So you're now the FIM Oceania president. What's that role entail?
Look, not a lot. We're big country down here, but small population. Oceania is only Australia and New Zealand. So we don't have that opportunity to try and get other countries in. New Caledonia belongs to the French. There's not a lot of motorcycle activity in Fiji or New Guinea. So really it's just us in New Zealand. So we're trying to foster better relationships and competition, across ditch with our new Kiwi friends.
Yeah, cool. And just on the personal side for you, like how's that been going from a mechanic, rider, racer, behind the gate, out of the office to in the office as a CEO? Is it frustrating at times? Is it heavy-handed?
Look, it was the main reason I ended up leaving Kawasaki in 2000, was that I was a mechanic on the race team, and I became the race team manager, motocross and road race, enduro, we were involved in everything, and then became national technical manager, warranty, recalls. So in the end, the expectation was that you were 5 days a week almost sitting in behind a desk with a suit on.
Gotcha.
And that just wasn't me. I think a lot of that historical stuff that you've got to wear a collar and tie and a suit every day to work, they need to move on.
Yep.
I went to America for 14 years, and the Japanese used to turn up in thongs and shorts to business meetings.
Nice.
And nobody has a crack at them. So I don't believe a suit and tie is what's required to make a business go forward. So, but I did get sick of that at Kawasaki, so I moved on, and I wanted to get back on the tools. So that's why I went to the US.
Yeah, cool. Sounds like a philosophy of getting things done rather than looking like you're getting things done.
Yeah.
Basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's great, mate. Thanks for sharing that. I want to get into the nitty gritty on MA a little bit more. So I've done some Googling. MA has 32,700 members, 350 clubs, 3,000 officials. Are those numbers correct?
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, it fluctuates a bit, but yeah, you're very close.
Yeah. And so in terms of those numbers over the past 5, 10, 20 years, is it on an upwards trend, downwards trend? Is it stable?
It's what we would call stable now. COVID really upset everything, every business, especially being member-based.
Mm-hmm.
Things were quite flat when I got here. Well, things were on a downhill trend. It was quite flat in 16, 17, 18, flat to even reducing. COVID hit and everything halved. And so...
As in member numbers?
Member numbers, everything halved. I mean, and you get it. Why would you want to pay for a membership that you couldn't use because Victoria had shut the sport down for 6 months, New South Wales for 6 months over 2 different years, and so people weren't renewing. We had to react pretty quickly to get some offerings out there to keep people riding, hence the launch of the Ride Park Australia, RPA, work with our insurers and our partners. So it was decimated, and we communicate with a lot of other sports. All sports were the same.
Yep.
They copped it. Of course, when we come out the other side of COVID, clubs got going, events got going, and look, numbers-wise, you've got to take some of the historical data with a grain of salt.
Yep.
Because it's all manually reported, so it depends on what benefit it was to report high or low numbers. But now everything's electronic. The numbers that we would have would suggest that 2023 would be as good a year in membership as history was ever shown. So
yeah, wow. So an upwards trend since COVID,
yep.
Would you say?
Yeah, massive upwards trend since COVID. And I think that was reflected in the motorcycle market.
Yep.
I think, while we're all locked up at home, the motorcycle market was increasing and our numbers were going down. Once we all got released from COVID jail, people started using those bikes, renewing their memberships, getting active, and our numbers started to skyrocket again. It was still in effect, by the way, in 2022, despite the fact that COVID officially ended in 21, because nobody knew what the governments were going to do, nobody was setting calendars investing money in the early part of 22.
Yep.
You'll notice that World Superbike moved its event from February 22 to November 22 to give it the best chance of being able to take place. So 22 was still a recovery year, but still affected by COVID. And then 23, first year, unaffected by COVID. So really, let's call it since 2020. And it really showed we'll end up with near record numbers.
Yeah, right. So can you nearly say bike sales are like a direct correlation of MA members with a little bit of latency?
Yeah, correct. There's a bit of there's clearly a link.
Yep.
When you get into bike sales, ride days, social riding, ride parks, that activity is clearly linked to the retail market.
Yeah, gotcha. And so those member licensings, the clubs, that's MA's revenue. That's where you draw it in.
Oh no. Club revenue belongs to the club and the state.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't take any.
And your
revenue.
members?
Our largest revenue is for licensing.
Yeah. And that took quite a hit during COVID.
Yeah.
Did your costs go down or up during that time, or how was
Costs went down. I mean, we had to shut offices, and look, we were able to manage our way through. We didn't have to actually terminate or sack any staff. We were able to do deals with the staff, use up holidays, juggle schedules around, because we were closed for a long time. Nobody was in the office, everybody was at home.
Yeah.
But our expenses went down as well. Now,
gotcha.
Fortunately, the feds and the state governments were all pretty generous in keeping non-for-profits running. So they're a huge help.
Yep, awesome. Now, sometimes a controversial topic, or probably the one that gets the average person to get up in arms, is where does the money go from an MA membership when they pay for a licence?
Look, a majority of the money goes in insurance now. Yep. So everyone's aware, and it's not a secret. Public liability's been terrible. The insurance markets are really hard right now. So the cost to insure the sport right now annually with your public liability, personal accident, you've got to have associations liability or directors and officers to protect the clubs and the boards. You're looking at just over $3.6 million now annually. Then you've got to throw in your cyber insurance, your officers insurance, start throwing all that in, and that's the substantial cost. So the largest single cost of the sport.
The 3.6, that's your insurance premium. Yep. And then you've got all the structure. So how many staff, officers?
Yeah, you've got to fund the staff.
Just operating costs in general.
Operating costs. States work off their own. We are independent companies. So
yep.
MA and the 7 states are all independent companies, separate businesses, trying to operate as together, but they are separate businesses. They've got to generate their own revenue. And they generate revenue by selling permits, etc., and events to clubs.
Yep.
That's where they make their money.
And MA handles all the insurance, is that
all the insurance
correct?
is centrally. Yep.
So there was a press release that went out late 2023,
yep.
and it looked pretty dire.
Yeah.
From when I read it.
Yep.
I've got a little bit of a clip here out of it, and I'll read it just for those that haven't. I'll take the last bit out of it here. MA's risk profile was becoming too high for our insurer to be prepared to renew our cover. The impact of a non-renewal of our insurance cover would have meant that all MA permitted motorcycling activity in Australia would have to cease on October 31, 2023. How serious was that?
Pretty serious. Look, we were unable to get renewal terms at one stage. Look, it's not, behind the scenes there's always problems with insurance due to your risk. Right, so you start seeing incidents that occur, not just here, also globally. But you've seen spectators getting killed at Fink. That was very public. Targa, Tasmania. We had a few ourselves, not spectators, thankfully. While no fatality is, nothing good comes out of fatality for anybody. In this day and age, you hurt spectators, you are treading a fine line. And motorsport's treading a fine line when it comes to hurting spectators. There's an expectation, and you as a former rider will also know this, there's an expectation that motorcycle racing is dangerous. And you're going to go out there and look at areas like Supercross and road racing. Supercross, highly specialised, you make a mistake, it's going to hurt. Road racing, they're doing 350 kilometres an hour. You're not going to get off lightly when you hit the ground. So you'll start looking at your risk profile, but riders generally accept that they're going to be hurt at some stage during their career, and they generally know that they've got to get over it and get on with it.
Yes,
spectators don't expect to get hurt. They expect to be able to turn up and not, have their children or their wife or them sitting there and have a motocross bike land on top of their car while they're sitting around the motocross track.
Yeah.
And these are the sort of areas where Australia has probably fallen behind a little bit to the rest of the world. On the other side of it, I would think from the point of view of where the law sits, we are possibly the most litigious country in the world now. And that's actually a bigger issue. And that's one of the things that affects our insurance renewal. So what we had to do was introduce what we call a gross negligence clause.
Yep.
Our policy has never had a gross negligence clause. So you can be as negligent as you like. And in the end, the insurance company pays. Now it's got a gross negligence clause, which means if you are grossly negligent,
Right.
then it's no different to when you drive your car home, and if you've had a few too many and you crash your car and you're found to be over 0.05, your insurance company doesn't pay.
So, and grossly negligent would be in terms of a spectator getting hurt, mostly?
No,
in an event,
not necessarily. Look, accidents always happen, but gross negligence would be known risk, and somebody gets injured.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you've ignored it, and it's like the guy standing in the middle of the freeway here, and we watch him for an hour as he wanders back and forth across the road. The reality is, when you're in a controlled environment like a racetrack and you see that happening, you've got to do something about it.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't, and he gets hit, or you allow him to stand there and he gets taken out, well, you break the rules and it hurts somebody. That's not good for the sport. It's not going to be good for those people.
You mentioned Australia's like the most litigious country. Why is that?
I think it's because our laws allow the ambulance chasers to go after people, and when a family has somebody who gets injured, or even a rider, you're sitting at home there and someone says, listen, Kale, you broke your leg there because that official, that other rider took you out. He shouldn't have done that. He broke the rules. I'm going to get you money, and he tells you he's going to get you $2 million, and you sit there and go, some people sit there and go, wow, and it doesn't cost me anything until we get to the other end. And you get to the other end and they settle the claim for 100 grand and they take 150, and all it does is damage the sport.
So are these those no win, no fee ads you see on the TV?
That's them.
Gotcha.
Yep. And they are rife in Australia.
And are they not permitted elsewhere, or is it just easy market?
Easy market. I think the other thing is that in other countries you can sign your rights away. In Australia you can't.
Is that like a black event type?
Well, no, you can sign. You sign a
At your own
waiver.
risk.
You sign a waiver, and you go to riders' briefing. You enter events where you tell everybody you're not going to sue.
Yeah.
Yet we still get sued 6 to 9 times a year.
So explain that process. I've always wondered that. Like, why can't you just do things at your own risk? Why is it?
Well, you can.
Why do you have to be liable to it?
Your family or your partner or don't sign the waiver.
Yeah. Gotcha. And that's where the lawyers come in, and
that's where the lawyers come in.
Times get tough.
And times are tough, and we'll attack whoever's got money.
Yeah.
But of course they take most of it. So that's that a lot of people are unaware that we get 6 to 9 public liability cases actions launched against us every year.
And are they usually initiated by like the family of the injured rider, or a lawyer?
I think the lawyers initiate.
They've convinced them to do it.
They've convinced them to do it.
That's quite sad. It's like greedy profiteering.
The names for a reason. I mean, they read items in the press and they make contact.
And that's
sometimes
their business model.
They're the initiator.
Wow.
Yeah.
What can you do about that?
Nothing.
No.
In other countries, Europe and America, we'll use those for example. We discuss with our counterparts in other countries. You can run a MotoGP race in Europe with 100,000 people there on about a €1 million public liability policy. In America, you can run MotoGP on a $5 to $10 million public liability policy. Here, you can't run anything for under 20 million.
Yep.
It's just ridiculous.
Can you just have general public liability, or it's got to be specific through?
The problem is now that most general public liability policies have an exclusion for motorcycles and motorsport.
They do. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's the problem. It's like travel insurance.
It's kind of sad because I'm just saying, like, the riskier everything is, the more they're just going to push it away and say we don't cover it.
Well, what they do is, in the end, when you look at insurance markets, there's probably only 6 to 8 insurers worldwide, and they're doing like Motorsport Australia with car racing, or some events in the US, or us here in Motorcycling Australia, we might have 6 insurers on our insurance program. What that means is that when we put it out there into the marketplace, they come along and say, yeah, they've got a pretty good risk profile. We might take 20% of that ticket, and someone else might take 60%. So it's not made up of just one insurer. And in the end, those insurers are on multiple different markets. So they could be insuring us, Motorsport Australia, Moto America, FIM, England. They could be insuring other sports. In the end, there's only 6 to 8 globally that are really involved.
And they all compete with each other, I'm assuming?
They all compete with each other, and what happens is that they decide that that area of their business, they look at the returns versus the outgoings and say, oh, this year we're going to drop the bottom 10% of our riskiest areas. And if we happen to fall in that,
as we nearly did by the sounds of it.
As we nearly did.
So back to that press release, like how close was that, and in the future, is that a risk or?
Look, we were, to give you how close the timelines were, we probably were aware and confident that our ticket was going to be filled probably in the first week of October. We didn't get renewal terms, actual terms on our desk until 48 hours before the end of the month. Now, look, that's not completely out of whack for the insurance market.
Okay.
I spoke to one other motorsport organisation in Australia, and they got who do their renewal on the 31st of December, 1st of January, and they got their terms at lunchtime on December 31.
And just to put in perspective, what's on the limbo, like if that didn't come through, what?
That January 1, everything was off.
And same for MA, if that?
Yep. November 1, everything could have been off.
And then what?
And then...
Hypothetically,
clubs and people wouldn't operate, because all of a sudden when there's no insurance, that means they become personally liable. Which means if you run an event, say I'm going to run it anyway, well, the directors of that club or that state, or you personally, if you ran the event, then all your assets will be on the line if and when it went wrong.
Is it a lot of that the landowner as well?
Yep.
They're liable probably the most?
Yeah. Our permits that are issued for an event protect the landowner. Landowner gives permission to the club. Club gets the permit with public liability, which covers the landowner.
Gotcha. So to summarise all this for people watching, majority of what you do is insurance, majority of licence fees is insurance. Majority of rules that come through are insurance. Like, it's not...
so much around insurance right now and the risk. So where we've got to all go is to try and... The sport's never going to be completely safe. We know that. But there's certain areas we can do where we can put in processes that protect people.
Yep.
And right now, the focus on that is to ensure, well, we're never going to be insured completely, but try to ensure that we, when people turn up to watch you guys ride, that they do, they can come there and not expect to go home maimed by a motorcycle.
Yeah, gotcha. So to put it in like real layman's terms again, there was a price increase, I think this past year or the year before? Was that purely insurance premium going up?
Yep.
Yeah.
Purely insurance costs.
So everyone in the comments saying, MA, it's...
Look, people say if you talk to the people who have been on the receiving end of insurance, and we got one the other day, did a seminar in New South Wales, and a guy wrote us an email and said he was on the receiving end of the MA insurance that protected him in a liability case about 10 years ago that went for 5-6 years, the case. And he said, it was such a, he felt he was so well protected, didn't cost him a cent. They attempted to sue him. Yeah. He was an official. And he said without it, he probably wouldn't have been within the sport anymore. So we pay out around, our personal accident policy runs somewhere upwards of around $1.2 million a year.
That's a payout.
That's for That's personal accident. So that's for people who get permanent injuries, fatalities, serious injuries.
Yeah.
That's attached to your licence. It varies between $1.1 and $1.2 million a year.
And that's consistent.
That's the premium. Yep. And
Yep.
we set that because that's our insurance, and it pays out $1.1 to $1.3 million a year.
Yep. Sorry, the payout I meant, is that consistent?
Pretty
Like,
consistent. And
you
the
can
premium
almost-
gets reflected. You know, if we have a bad year, and this year didn't start out great, but if we have a bad year and, you know, you have 1 or 2 fatalities and a couple of, you know, serious injuries, neck, back, spinal, it's pretty easy to throw away $500,000 in 4 or 5 races.
How often are those accidents just pure accidents? Like, because it's funny to hear
quite
that
a
they're
few.
consistent. It's almost like you would think there's always a
Yeah.
reason and a cause.
Quite a few. Look, it's very relatively consistent, but as a sport, we don't bank on it, but we sit there and go, you know, based on history, we know there's going to be 1 to 2 fatalities a year.
Yeah.
History dictates that. Most of them are fatalities are usually single bike incidents. Well, guy makes a mistake and serious consequences. But some of them are caused by, could be caused by the track probably not being up to standard. Hasn't moved with the times. You know, safety runoff area. Those ones are, as sad as they are reasonably clear cut. The ones that are not clear cut are when you permanent injuries, and they're very sad when you've got young up and coming people who are injured and have a permanent spinal, neck, back injury that they can't ride again, and they've got to carry those injuries for the rest of their lives. So that is all from the personal accident program.
Yep.
And people don't realise that until they're on the receiving end of it. You hope you don't, and the majority of members are not on the receiving end of a personal accident claim.
Yep.
Few of those probably complain about it, but the best that they're not on the receiving end of it.
Yeah. You complain about it until you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you're just unaware of it in general.
Yeah.
So there was an incident with Michael Schumacher,
Yes.
it might have been nearly a decade ago now, where he had a GoPro mount on his helmet.
Yep.
That led to severe head trauma.
Yep.
That's the reason why insurance companies said to MA not to run GoPros on the helmet anymore, because that was, for the average person watching that's been involved, they'll remember that, and there was a big controversy about why can't we run GoPros and whatnot, and is that basically, that's the chain of events?
Well, it is, and it's a really interesting topic, that, and I was heavily involved in that from many angles. So the FIM and many countries around the world banned helmet cameras after that.
Yep, it was because of that.
There were others,
Pretty much.
but that was the public profile.
Yeah.
And it's like anything, if you run an event with 500 people, right, and you don't have any media, everyone has a great time, no one cares what goes on, there's no scrutiny. Run an event where you've got media involved, or have a personality turn up and get injured, all of a sudden your profile and your event and everything's out there. Michael Schumacher, helmet cameras, that caused a global change in the way people looked at helmet cameras. First people we went to were the helmet manufacturers and said, well, these are your helmets, so are you happy for us to allow helmet mounts? Not one helmet manufacturer said yes. They all said no.
Because then they're liable.
And they said there is no liability if you stick something on the helmet. So how could a rider with half a brain expect that anybody else was going to cover if the helmet manufacturer?
Because now they've said that, well now your MA would be
correct.
Next in line to be liable.
Next in line would be MA, another country, another federation, FIM, but the helmet manufacturers said no. And maybe what people should take a little bit more notice of is, well, if the helmet companies say no, why would somebody like MA say yes?
Yeah, just to get in trouble,
right?
just to be liable.
They've told us no.
Yeah.
They will not accept liability.
Yeah.
So end of story.
Gotcha. So you almost just have to react to things that happen. It's not so much MA saying, we do this, we're doing that, we're not doing this, we're not doing that.
So we'll circle back to our ambulance chaser now that you've raised the topic. So regulatory bodies around the world say that helmet cameras should be banned, especially start looking at after the Schumacher incident, and the helmet manufacturers say no liability, they shouldn't be running them on helmets. MA say, yeah, sure, we'll allow it. You know what's going to happen when someone gets hurt? That the sport would disappear. That is a case where you would sit there and say, yeah, we need all of our $20 million public liability, because if somebody gets injured and the helmet manufacturer said no, the global body said no, all these other organisations that are involved in safety and regulatory matters around the world say no, and we said yes, our insurer is going to come back and say, yeah, no, not for us. Because now we are putting them at risk.
Yep.
Because they've all said no. And that's that discussion that goes round where ambulance chasers get involved, and it's a known risk, you've hurt somebody.
Gotcha.
Now the ironic part to this, and that may be something you don't know, and I've got a photo of it, I shouldn't share it around, but there are many discussions of helmet cameras, and we've got pictures of helmet cameras, and one of them from Australia, where they moved it from one helmet to the other, and obviously they couldn't get that really great glue that's used on the GoPro mounts, so they tech screwed it, with 25mm tech screws that pierced his skull when he hit the ground.
Oh, wow.
Right? And there's a photo of the tech screws coming through the helmet, and when he hit the ground like that, they dug into his head.
Can anybody be liable for that other than him?
Us for letting him do it.
Scrutineering.
No. He's not liable at all.
Yeah, because that helmet should have been scrutineered or something. And
Shouldn't have been scrutineered.
Shouldn't have been let through.
Cameras are banned. Mount shouldn't have been
off it
there.
goes.
And that's the same. People sit there now and say, oh, well, it's only the mount. Yeah, okay. So whose job is to check how the mount's installed?
It's an issue.
Yeah. GoPro say it's not installed by our recommendation, because our recommendation is only to use the epoxy that comes on it.
Yeah.
So who would be liable? The insurance company.
So I think about this a bit, and I try not to get too down when I think about it, but does it ever reach a plateau of...
No, stupidity continues
it's just
every day.
But like, are the rules and regs just there's a new accident, so there's a new insurer, so there's a new claim, so is it...
They've got to involve, and I think...
Whatever get to a point where it's like, you got hurt, it's your fault.
No, it'll never get to that in our lifetime. Especially, in this day and age, you can't offend people. There's a lot of things that were able to be done many years ago that are not accepted as public practice now. Mm-hmm. Everybody's a journalist. Everybody's a media with their phones and cameras. What we've got to do is just continue to involve rules and regulations. We're not way out at sea, by the way. It's just that sometimes when a minor change comes through, it's controversial.
Yeah.
Look, we've got rules and regulations as an example in our rule book that need changing. And the battle to change a rule sometimes through a member-based organisation is difficult. And we've got some in there that say, oh, you've got 14 days to do this. You know why the 14 days is there? Because it was put in there to cover Australia Post many years ago.
Yeah.
And people don't want to change the rule because believe it or not, there's a large group of people out there who still use Post.
Gotcha.
So we've got to evolve as a sport.
Yeah.
And that's a small example, but that's an example of not getting with the times. Unfortunately, we have to be able to cover that.
We'll segue into that a little bit more. You've mentioned MA as a federated structure.
Yep.
So give the process, if just the average Joe, they're a member at their club, they ride for fun, or they're a club official, how would they go about a rule change if you wanted to make a difference or implement something?
Fortunately, the rule change...
or just outline the structure
quite
in
easy.
general. Yeah.
It's one of the easiest things in our federated structure because it's because the rules are under MA directly. The structure is that there's a form on the website. Any member can download it, fill it out, put a rationale behind it, of why it would improve the sport. And one of the things I always use is we get rule changes, or I recommend to people, is that any rule change you put forward, you should be able to sit back and say, this is a benefit to 95% of the members out there, not the 5%.
Yeah.
And that's one thing to sit back there and look. Is it more expensive? Is it going to cost people a lot more? Is it safer? What's the safety implications? Does it benefit a majority of the minority, right? So if you start having a look at those and not your own narrow focus, it might be for you, it might be for your kids, start having a look at that, and then put your rationale, put it in paper, comes through, it's viewed by a group of members, other members. So those members, just like you, will sit there and review it as a group, and they'll make a recommendation to the MA office that will then go to the Rules and Technical Committee with a yay or a nay.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty simple.
Gotcha.
Does take a period because a lot of people in that chain are volunteers. 2025 rule change process is now open.
Gotcha.
And it will be complete by August, September.
And so it's essentially no different, like we just had the vote yes, vote no campaign where the people had to vote and the politicians are held to that. Motorcycling Australia is the same, the members will vote. That'll be it.
They vote, you know. There's a lot of rules in the rule book I don't like. There's no use me complaining about them. As an administrator now in the sport, there's an expectation for me. And by the way, that goes to all MA and state staff members and boards. We as administrators, board members, involved in the leadership of the sport should abide by the rules, even if we don't like them. We also know that there's a process, just like you. The process is there if we want to change it. I quite often get on my high horse and have a bit of a crack at a rule change every year. And it's not my job to do that now, but I still like to stay involved in that. And we'll talk about one that you'll be familiar with. And it took me 2 years to get it done, and that was MX3.
Gotcha.
So I drove MX3, I was the driver and the instigator of the MX3 category away from the under-19s to bring that age grouping down. And it took me 2 years, and you wouldn't believe the opposition. And everybody, all the experts in the sport who said it will never work, it was never going to work, it will fail. Most of the states didn't and haven't adopted it. And it's still selling out at every MX round since it was being brought in. Now some of the states are adopting it into their state championships.
So am I correct to assume the opposition was the states? Or?
States and some clubs, But the states were, state managers were firmly opposed to it, and none of them introduced it in the first year. It's creeping in now. They're introducing MX3 across a number of states, but some of them are still not doing it.
And what's like your personal raising for MX3 rather than under 19s?
So we're stuck with age groups that were there when I raced bikes. And I remember going to restricted licence holder, I still refer to that, RLH, which is junior motocross, 13 to under 16. I rode that when I was 13 years old. With kid motocross, all those events that were going on back then, and that's in the 70s. So I was on a twin shock bike with an underpipe, right? Bikes have evolved. Bikes are a lot better nowadays than they were back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Some of our rules are stuck back in the 70s, and then they wonder why we've never produced a motocross world champion. And that's because we're 20 years behind the world.
You believe that?
Absolutely.
Right?
We've had some good goes at it, but have a look at other disciplines, enduro, road racing, speedway. We've been a country that's batted way above our average. Yet we're bound by these rules and regulations of the 60s and 70s. So I've had a crack at changing that, and bikes are better, safety equipment's better, coaching's better, the ability to access training and go to qualified people who are experts, being former riders, being nutritionists. The education's much better, yet we're still focusing on having kids being able to get on a peewee at 4 years old and still ride that peewee at 7 years old. I don't get, there's no progression there.
Yeah, gotcha.
So the sport has held itself back.
Yeah.
We did have a go at changing those junior age groups. We have done it in a lot of other disciplines. We're tickling around motocross right now. Motocross is our biggest discipline, so there's obviously a lot more opposition to change as well. MX3 came in because, first of all, a category needed to get down to under 18 where everybody still requires a guardian. You had this class that was from 16 years old where you're sort of becoming a senior to 19, but you still needed a guardian up down here, but you didn't need a guardian up here. So what we did, and you'll crept in over time, MX1 hasn't changed. It's still 16 years old, you go to MX1.
Yeah.
But MX2 was the same. So what we did was we pulled MX2 down 1 year to 15. We brought in MX3, which is 14 to under 18. And then you got junior motocross at 13, right? Where you're on a 250. So you come out of your 85s, you're junior motocross at 13. If you're a good talent, you're an MX3 at 14. If you're an exceptional talent, you're in MX2 at 15. And if you're good enough, that happens every now and again, at 16 you'll be on a factory bike and MX1.
Yeah.
So your career path is there set. If you're not good enough, if you're a late developer, if you're not interested in getting there, you don't have to get out of that class.
Yeah, but right? You do have the opportunity to progress.
Opportunity to progress, opportunity to hold back a year or so.
Yeah.
Right? So, I think you're seeing the benefits of that now in the national motocross at the moment. MX3 is still oversold, MX2 is full at every round, and MX1 we're now, every year changes, and I know that there's financial elements to it, but we finished the season last year in Queensland with 2 rounds where MX1, 2 and 3 were all full gates.
Yeah, awesome.
That hasn't been done in 20 odd years.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it always has puzzled me that, like, the average age of MX2's probably been around, like, mid-20s sometimes, early 20s. But you look in America, it's like Hayden Deegan's winning or a Jet Lawrence or
Have a look at Grand Prix winners, right? And when you hear this guy of a teenager winning a Grand Prix, he didn't just step into Grand Prix and win. He's been winning in his home country for a few years before that. Some people say we've got to follow the World Championship rules. Well, hang on a minute. If we follow them, that means they're not going to ride an MX2 bike until they're 15.
Yeah.
We need to get them on. They need to learn race etiquette and race against solid competition in their home country before they go to MXGP.
Yeah.
World Championship organisers and promoters don't want us sending people to them that are not qualified to be there. They don't want people turning up not to qualify or to interfere with their race. The expectation is that when we endorse them to go racing internationally, that they at least have good racecraft and good speed and understand the sport.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I think it's a little known fact that Loretta Lynn's in America, you can ride a 450 at age, is it 13 or 12?
Yeah, it's quite low.
It's quite young, yeah.
It's quite low.
And then in Australia,
I'm not sure whether Australia would accept that.
That's pretty well.
But we've had a go at that, and we're going to have a little crack at some very entry level stuff in off-road motocross in the next 12 months.
Yep.
We've got a little pathway at the top. We've now got to try and start creating that at entry level.
Yeah.
And I think the middle part will come along where the most opposition is. People are invested. They've got their 65 and their 85 and their 125, and they don't want to see change. And so we've got to be a bit wary of how we go about change.
I just got to say, it's awesome to hear your passion for developing riders from a young age, because like most people would assume the CEO, you'd think, like you said before, you come in. Yep. It's probably the last thing they're thinking about. They're looking at spreadsheets and and balance sheets. But we'll segue into motocross and enduro
Yep.
since we've gotten there. Of that member base, which is around 33,000 members roughly, how much of that is motocross and enduro riders?
So a little bit of a grey area, but for the point of the discussion, if you put 40% down for motocross,
Yeah, right.
Possibly slightly higher, but there is variances in any of the data you get. So it's a solid 40%,
Yeah.
probably closer to 45,
Wow.
right? But solid 40%, and then you have enduro and road racing are fighting around that 12%.
So is motocross the biggest percentage
Absolutely.
of members?
Long way.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, look, I think that ease of getting a motocross bike, especially when we're all young,
Yeah.
because people say you're a speedway guy or you're a road race guy, or in the end we all start in a motocross bike, don't we? Technically,
Yeah. Yeah.
in reality,
Yeah.
and we all started a motocross bike and or a dirt bike at a motocross track.
There's a lot of Australian MotoGP champions that have come from motocross.
Absolutely.
Well, not champions, but racers. Casey Stoner, Jack Miller, they all.
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
Robbie Phillips, I think.
Yep.
I remember his son Al.
All of them. All the road races come from motocross, and a typical pathway now in Australia is we all come from motocross, and the dirt track speedway guys, road race guys will move to dirt track, and then speedway and road race.
Gotcha.
It's a very common pathway. Motocross, stay motocross with a bit of enduro on the side.
Yeah.
But then you've got guys like Steve Martin who come from trials.
Yeah, okay.
He's a bit of a one-off. He was Australian trials champion before he went road racing, I think.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, a bit of a different.
Gotcha.
thing.
A lot of them, I do listen to a lot of MotoGP interviews, and they will attribute a lot of their skills to motocross, and they'll train during the week on motocross or speedway. Typically,
All our motocross, all our road race riders that I dealt with, and there's a lot in Australia, all had motocross bikes. Part of their contract when they become contractor riders is we would supply them a motocross bike.
Okay.
And then we had a period there where, think Matt Mladen and Chris Hill, they were our gun junior motocross juniors, and they progressed to road racing.
Yeah, that's a cool pathway. So we've got the Supercross and Motocross series in Australia. Supercross is run 4 rounds over 6 weeks.
Yep.
Motocross series is 8 rounds over 6 months.
Yep.
Why the difference between the two?
Look, it's calendar's one of the worst jobs that I think this organisation has. So there's over 5,000 events permitted now under the Motorcycling Australia a year.
Wow.
So think of that in 50 weekends
Is that 100 a weekend?
across the country, 100 a weekend.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, and we all still, I'm saying this with a smile on my face, we all still want to be nice to each other and say, oh, you can't do that, and I want that weekend, and I want that weekend. The reality is we've got to get beyond that and look what the rest of the world does. 5,000 activities taking place through the year.
That's so much more than I thought.
So let's pull out how a calendar works. So let's pull out Formula One, not motorcycles. Who wants to run an event around Melbourne Formula One weekend? So therefore you need to head off. ASBK is running on Formula One weekend in Sydney on Saturday night, right? So we can still utilise the weekend, and a lot of off-road communities in other states won't care about Formula One.
Yeah.
But when you want to have motocross and ASBK on television, live television, why would you waste your money putting it on Formula One weekend?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You just pour money in the toilet.
Yeah, no, you need to
Right.
structure it the best possible.
So you can't go Formula One weekend with those events.
Yeah.
You can't go Bathurst V8 weekend.
So you prioritise the biggest profile events and slowly work your way down.
No, the whole world does.
Gotcha.
So nobody will set a MotoGP calendar until you have a Formula One calendar, right?
Right.
Nobody will set the World Superbike calendar until you have a MotoGP calendar.
So what's like Formula One, MotoGP,
World Superbike, then
Yeah,
we now have World Supercross,
Yep.
which we don't have dates for, but so we've got the Beyond the Back of Nowhere Club Day on somewhere in Australia, and Global Supercross, World Supercross is going to say we're going to run a World Championship event. We want to run a World Championship event. Do you think we should move the club day, or should we tell Global World Supercross to go away?
Yeah.
But they're the battles you fight internally.
There's just going to be 5,000 events. That's so many, more than I thought.
So they're the battles you fight.
Yeah.
And we get it. The people around that event, whatever other event is, and this global promoter comes in and says, we're coming to Australia,
Yeah.
it's a real fight.
Yeah, I don't envy that. Like I see it with the northern regions, even just in the Victorian state, trying to work it in. Sometimes there is no right answer. It's just
we look at where we sit. AMA Supercross, very clearly a globally followed series.
Yep.
High profile. It's got January to May wrapped up, right? Supercross in Australia traditionally is summer. They want to run, well, they're not going to run in winter because it's such a high risk, high investment if you're going to have rain everywhere. Right? And that's why they're trying to use even indoor stadiums now to further give that security of not having a mud or having an event cancelled, right? So now you've got World Supercross sitting in the calendar. Mm-hmm. So AMA Supercross, Australian Supercross, World Supercross. So you've got to have that period of looking at calendars and say, where do we best fit? Right now, whether it's the best fit, Australian motocross has always traditionally ran April to August. You've got to remember that we move into donations in September. Right? So the reality is we've got to select a team of our motocross riders. It's got to be selected based on form, or we just forget the donations.
Well, yeah, I've always been curious. Motocross in the middle of winter, sometimes it's good, but a lot of times it can be.
Oh, look.
For let's say crowd attendance, putting on the event, it's probably would be better if it was maybe a bit forward or a bit later.
The rest of the world runs
AMAs in the summer. Yeah.
Right?
Why are we that way?
We go to the next battle. In our society of Australians that we live in, they've always got to look for something to complain about.
Yep.
And if we start to run motocross in summer, we'll probably get sued for child abuse for running in 38 to 43 degree, or we'll cancel all those events.
I was going to say, I wish you were joking, but
I'm not joking. The society we live in now would dictate to you that you probably can't run when it gets into 40, 42, 44 degree, and think about rural Australia, there's a bucket load of that goes on in summer. So, hence you get caught in between, we've even had people say, oh, you need a heat policy. Well, the problem with having a heat policy is, if you can't use common sense and you've got a policy, once you've got a policy, if you break that policy, then you're in trouble.
This is a whole other topic on its own, yeah.
It's another topic on its own, isn't it, right?
You see it on the news, they'll say a 35 degree heat wave and you're thinking that's not...
Correct. Now, America, I lived there for 14 years. It's common to race in 38 to 40 degree days at altitude at Pikes Peak.
Yeah, I looked it up once. It was I think it said 110 Fahrenheit. And I'm like, how hot really is that? And it's very hot.
It's very hot. We're running fans on... We had to put some fans together for the motocross bike, the Suzuki Works bikes with Dungey and those guys. Yeah. Because we had to put all this insulation. They were boiling the fuel in the tank, and the things were overheating.
That's right. Yeah.
The AMA said, "We don't care. That's not our bikes aren't our problem. That's your problem." Right. So the rest of the world races in summer. Yeah. And we don't.
I would not have expected that answer. Bugger.
If you want to look at it personally, if you want your sport to, again, you want to be able to sit at home in Queensland and watch the live motocross from Victoria, right? You'll be best off going into summer. There's no AFL. Yeah. There's no NRL, right? Bathurst and supercars are over. You're dealing with cricket, which has got its own problems as a sport, but cricket doesn't have... I don't think many motorcycle people are really avid sit at home and watch a 5-day test match cricket fans, right? No. So I would suggest that there's definitely an opening for a series to move into that space. There was an attempt by the road race guys to move into that space. Yep. it was blocked by a lot of the manufacturers because they couldn't get their head around competing over 2 calendar years and how rider contracts would work and how bonuses would work, how their budgets would work, right? So it was close. So there's a lot of pros and cons. Yeah. Start looking at weather. Start looking at juniors. You know, should we have kids on 65s out doing 15-minute motos in 43 to 44 degree heat? Oh no, what we'll do is we'll change the schedule. What we'll do is we'll start running at night. And what we'll do is we'll cancel the race. Right? There's all these what ifs and buts.
But if you talk pure value for the series, you'd probably rather go in summer.
If you ask me,
forget everything else like insurance,
motocross and or road racing to move into a summer series.
Yeah.
I think there's an avenue or there's an opportunity for one to do it. The other thing to remember is that in motocross, you're a club-based organisation, right? A lot of our sports club volunteer, motocross especially. So you think clubs are going to be happy with dragging all their volunteers in over the summer holiday period to work on motocross events? Because if it was the case, why aren't they already doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha.
You with me? Yeah. So there's so much to it rather than say, oh, we should put the calendar and do this. Anybody who thinks of it as, I think it should go there because it suits me, yeah, well, they really don't know anything about the sport.
Yeah, there's a 2-year process to...
2-year process. And you know, you've got a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah.
Manufacturers, sponsors. You know, what are the people who are funding the sport or the events from a sponsorship side think? What do all the riders really think? You know, you get one or two, strong opinions, but they look at it mostly too simplistic.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now, Supercross, you've got potential which you didn't have many years ago to be able to look. You've got AMA Supercross running, that'll link into Global Supercross, that links into Australian Supercross, which links into the new Indian Premier League. You can be a full-time Supercross rider.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a whole, it is another discipline, but it's another...
You don't have to be Eli Tomac or Jet Lawrence to make a living out of it now if you're a competent Supercross rider.
Yeah.
Especially given that probably the top 10 guys in the world are all in America and only doing the AMA series. So, but there's a lot of opportunity now out there with Supercross. So we move motocross into that would upset a lot of people's ambitions.
I see where you're going. Yeah. Yeah, I think they have that trouble in America where they just want to keep adding Supercross races, but at some point motocross gets in the way and has to be there. But
yeah. At the moment, we see ourselves as a bit of a motocross country rather than a Supercross country. That's not to say Supercross can't grow. I mean, the promoters, hopefully, they're working along those lines. They don't want it to fail, they want it to grow. But unfortunately, Supercross is high dollar, high risk. Yeah,
yeah. So on the topic of growth, do you ever see motocross going from, say, that 33,000, or MA in general, or motocross, from that 33,000 to 40 to 50 to 60,000 members?
Oh, look, you do. I think we have limitations as a country. It's not just linked to us getting members and events and stronger events. It's also our population. I think if you look at per head of capita, there's always a metric somewhere.
I think it's 0.5% of people ride motorbikes.
Yeah.
And then like a smaller percentage of them race.
Yeah. Correct. So the biggest potential growth for MA is, I think, off-road. I think off-road is an untapped discipline. I think there's a lot of activity that goes on that is not under the MA umbrella, mainly in recreational space, big trail rides and enduro runs. And I think there's a lot of potential in off-road. Australia produces quality off-road enduro riders. Clearly our terrain's got something to do with that and some of the events they run down here. But I think there's potential there. But in the end, we are only 25 million people across a continent as big as America, bigger than Europe. and I think per head of capita we bat well above our average.
We do, yeah.
In all disciplines. It's also to our detriment, and I have to add this comment in here. People talk about the cost of the sport. And I spoke to a guy who's an Aussie guy in England who's got his kid in the British Superbike Championship, having a chat to him, and we were having a general debate about the cost of racing in Australia. And I said, listen, I'll give you a little exercise to do. I said, I want you to tell me how much your budget was on rental cars and airfares last year for the British Superbike Championship. He went quiet and he came back and he said 0. I said, that's right. He said, because you can live almost anywhere in England and drive to every track in 4 or 5 hours.
It's all close, yeah.
Right? There's no airfares. It's close. England's the size of Victoria.
Yeah.
Right? So
you forget that, don't you?
So imagine if we had 80 million people in Victoria, how strong motocross would be.
Yeah.
Right? And how cheap it would be to go racing, and how the competition between events and tracks, how the facilities would compete against each other to be the best facility.
Demand and supply, yeah.
We are so big that we start putting events on, and if we want, and I'll use motocross, we want CDR Yamaha to go to Perth next year and do a Pro MX round in Perth. Well, as soon as we put it on, we've just cost CDR Yamaha 20 grand just to put the event on.
Yep.
To start his truck up and drive his truck over and fly part of his crew over. Not all of it. I would suggest to you it's a $30,000 exercise with the cost of doing business in Australia.
Yeah, and that's just one team. Then you've got multiple.
Yeah, he's got. There's 2 riders and there's 6 staff. So there's 8 people, airfares, travel, accommodation, and a semi that starts in Melbourne and spends 8 days driving and another 3 or 4 days at the racetrack. Think of the cost.
It is very high cost. Do you think that could ever change? As in, like, we've always got to have the semis and whatnot, but it is a big operation for 8 weekends out of a 12-month calendar. Yep. Do you think the cost could ever be brought down a little bit to?
Do we bring the number of events up? Do we bring the cost down? I mean, those costs are beyond our control.
Yeah.
They're controlled by the retail sector.
Yep.
But it's directly a geography problem that we have in Australia that a lot of people don't consider.
Yeah.
Now, America has the same problem.
It's a classic, the old release the calendar, why is it only on the East Coast? And it's, there's only so much money. It can't, yeah.
Well, it is, but we need to go to Western Australia. We need to go to Darwin. We need to go to Tasmania.
Will we be in the future?
Oh, undoubtedly. They will be on the calendar.
Yep.
But the cost of putting on events also change with the requirement or the request or the, let's say, the expectation of industry of getting value for money and wanting a live TV program, which motocross has never had in this country. So it's now got a live free-to-air program. You're talking $60,000, $70,000 a round on the East Coast. Start getting your production company to buck up and go to Western Australia and Tasmania.
Yeah.
And you don't get...
Got to start somewhere.
So what you've got to do in this day and age is people have got to get off their backside and go to state government, go to LGAs and say, we want to bring the national motocross to our track. Right? We want to work with the national body, we want to work with Pro MX, and we want the event to turn up here, and the economic impact of that event is going to be, just so you're aware, the average economic impact for a Pro MX round for the local area is between $1.5 and $2 million for a 2-day event.
And that's in like accommodations, foods, just all the...
So the Pro MX paddock now is around, on a Saturday afternoon, is around 800 people. That's not spectator, that's the paddock. That's the working group. That's riders, family, friends, mechanics, managers, sponsors. It's 800 people in that little circus.
And what, they're all spending like $500 to $1,000?
And that's no spectators involved. Then you start adding spectators in, people who travel. So we're doing all that now. We're producing economic impact studies for each round, and we're giving them to local councils.
Is there a lot of potential there? So I do notice, like any big event in any country, it's usually somewhat funded by the local government.
Yeah. You can't have an event, so put it this way, you can't have a World Championship event in Australia in a blue ribbon series without government funding. Costs are way too high.
Just because of the money?
Just the money.
Yeah.
Pure money.
Wow. What percentage is funded by that government's?
Look, I think if you want to get some public documents, probably go and read Australian Grand Prix Corporation's annual report.
Okay.
And find out how much they lose on their two events, which is tens of millions.
Wow.
But the economic benefit to Melbourne or Victoria is hundreds of millions.
And does the government make up that shortfall? That
Grand Prix Corp is an arm of the government.
Gotcha.
So.
Sorry, I understand. So they're not a private promoter?
No, they're an arm of the government.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Formula One and MotoGP are run by Australian Grand Prix Corporation.
So they'll invest in an event that'll cost them a ton of money, but in return they'll get more people show up to the city and get it back into tourism.
So that's why the big events are, it's not possible for a club to run it. So you've either got to have people with a lot of financial backing to come in and they would have to put their personal money on the line or get government backing. Most people who have been involved in the game won't do it without some government backing. And governments will back it if the economic climate works for them.
To improve it.
Australian Open is backed by Australian Open tennis is a massive event now. Massive funding comes from the Victorian government.
It's so funny just having the talk. Like it's from a competitor's point of view, you're sort of just looking at the competition and the people and that's it. But then there's a whole economic system behind it that's basically is what's modelling everything. That most people would just be totally oblivious to and just think, why they ban this or why does this cost more and this, that and the other. And
they probably look at it a bit more. You look at even the cost of diesel now, and you'd be well aware in your experience that if you wanted to properly prep a track for what's called a motocross event, and not even a national, it doesn't matter, a nicely prepped track that you would like to ride on, there's a few days' work and a lot of diesel spent by. Now the diesel's got to be paid for by somebody.
It's a sad reality. Yeah, it's all going to be paid for somehow.
Right, and you're hoping that you can get enough volunteers at Clubland to give their time for free.
Yeah.
For the people to come and ride on it. Someone's got to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, we'll finish up. You have made a comment. It reads, volunteering isn't just about being close to the sport. It's building the networks, friendships, camaraderie, and the feeling of being a part of something that's bigger. That is, in my view, the truly rewarding aspect of it. Yep. That's your opinion with clubs, volunteers at the base level? The
volunteers, our sport, but all sports run on volunteers. Right through from us to AFL requires literally hundreds of volunteers to get these events up and running. And sometimes, they don't get the recognition they deserve. But I meet volunteers quite often. We just finished World Superbike. And funnily enough, we had our insurance broker was volunteering at World Superbike on the weekend. Went down and did full 4 days, camped on her own.
Yeah, right.
And she said it's the third year she's done it and loves it.
How good's that?
Just said the networking, meeting of other people, and she's our insurance broker. Probably a bit close to home because she's sitting there going, Jesus, is this what we're insuring? Loved it. So she camped, went to the officials' barbecues, took part in the whole weekend, and absolutely loved it. Networks with people. Yeah, loved it. You meet all sorts of people in volunteering, from lawyers to the unemployed. Yeah. Right. Most of them they're passionate people about the sport. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's so true. You can meet such a wide range of people just through the vehicle of sports, and that's volunteering is probably the best way to do it. Absolutely. The networking that people come back and say, oh, I met this person from, and you went, wow, what were they doing there? Yeah. So it's, but all sports need it. It's we can't put enough time and effort behind it. It just seems like you always need to do more. Yeah. And COVID was again massive hit. If you talk about 2 or 3 of the most important areas that were hit in sport, not just motorcycling, volunteering, because a lot of them, it was a passion, it was something they did, and they went and found something else to do because there wasn't many motorcycle events on, or there wasn't many football events. So they've all wandered off and done something else. So now it's rebuild time to get them back in.
Gotcha. Very good, mate. I've got one last question.
Yeah.
Bit of a bone to pick.
Yeah.
2-strokes. You got
Yeah.
rid of them this year.
They'll be back.
I'm just stirring
I'm
you
a
up.
2-stroke fan, by the way.
What happened there?
No, I think 2-strokes will come back. You mean specifically in motocross?
I only meant in MX2 and MX
MX2.
Nationals. Yeah. I was going to do
I
one
think
more.
they'll come back. I don't think they're going away.
Yeah.
You're hopeful that more people will build them and modernise them,
Yeah.
update them. I mean, some guys riding 2-strokes they're a bit old tech.
Yeah, look, when I see a bike with a carby on it, I'm a little bit sceptical these days.
I found a box of carbies the other day in the garage. I go, what are these? Look, I think there's always going to be room. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I would think we should have a 2-stroke class.
Yeah.
I think mum and dad can still work on 2-strokes.
Yeah.
You don't have to go and pay someone down the road because it's a 4-stroke and I've got to get my cam timing done, and I can't do that. And nobody wants to tool up for doing 4-strokes.
Yeah.
You can't just whip the head off from the barrel and put a new ring in it.
Yeah.
I wish they would come back, and I wish more people would make them, and so that there was a broader range of machinery available.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the 2-stroke days, they're a good thing to think about, but...
Yeah, and we've just got to get more people to build some.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what even a 125, but a 250 2-stroke using the last 20 years of technology in motocross, what it might be if they built a brand new one from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sorry, I'll just give you one more question if that's all right.
Yeah.
E-bikes, electric
Yes.
bikes.
Yep.
So you recently supported them. I may have noticed Adam Bailey was in Japan at the E-Explorer Cup. Seems like there's a few things possibly going on there for the future.
Look, they're coming.
Yeah.
There's no ifs or buts that they're coming. Are they the future? Jury's out on that with many people.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you talk some of the people I speak to that I've known for a long time who are involved in, say, some of the Japanese manufacturers out of Japan, they're not fully convinced that they're all going to have a full range of electric vehicles in the next few years. They've got alternate fuel being tested. They've got hydrogen engines. So there's a lot of different engine configurations and fuel configurations or power unit configurations are being tested. Electric's definitely here, and it's going to broaden. But
Do you think we'll see any in the MX Nationals this year? I know they're allowed.
don't think they'll do race distance. Maybe only as an 85, which means they wouldn't be competitive. But they're going to have their place. It's going to be controversial, no matter how you look at it. It was controversial when they brought the 400 Yamaha into Supercross, wasn't it? Globally controversy. Should never have happened, but in the end, it had to happen. And all the manufacturers followed suit. Electric bikes are here. They're probably here to stay in the near future, but they are just not refined to the level that you can go and grab one, throw it in the back of your van, turn up and be competitive in a 30-minute plus 2-lap moto.
Gotcha.
And I think probably at some club days they're going to go all right in a 10-minute moto. It's an alternate, it's a bike, it's got 2 wheels, people are using them. It will open up avenues in inner city areas for people to ride bikes.
Absolutely.
With no noise.
Yeah.
I think we have to embrace it, but I certainly don't think it's replacing ICE engines in the next 5 to 10 years. Not in our sport.
Yep. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
Cheers, mate.
Anytime.